And Griff and I welcome you to the fifth episode of the Exit Philosophy podcast. And Griff, we record every Monday, and it was a week ago today that the Anthony Bass Instagram post, social media post, and fallout began. And I don't know about you, but I've had more than my fair share of texts from people who listen to our show, DMs on Twitter and elsewhere from people who listen to our show saying, where were you two on the Bass topic? And I replied by saying, we record every Monday and we're going to let this thing play out over the course of a full week. And then we'll bring our opinions and our thoughts based on where the Blue Jays, Bass, and we are at the time of recording to the table.
Yeah, and my philosophy as a columnist, as a writer, as a news gatherer was always don't necessarily be the first, but be the best. And such a mantra carries into this situation because there were so many immediate reactions to the Anthony Bass situation. And so it has had a week to play out and develop. And so we're going to discuss it today and see where it takes us. But yeah, this is an issue that for the Blue Jays will not go away anytime soon, especially with their big promotion of Pride Weekend coming up on the second week of June.
Yeah, well, there actually is, Griff, an easy way to make this go away. And that's to make the individual who perpetrated this complete and utter misinformed nonsense. And if you're just joining us and you've been living under a rock, it's anti-LGBTQ stuff. It was a call for a boycott of Bud Light because Bud Light did a deal with a prominent transgender activist. Target came out with a clothing line for Pride Month, and Bass essentially was calling for a boycott of those two companies. And he was just essentially reposting, as they call it on Instagram, calls by people that or entities that he follows. So this is anti-LGBTQ plus stuff. And if your reaction to the way Griff and I have started this podcast is to throw your hand to your forehead and say, oh my God, do I have to listen to more of this? Do I have to hear about this again? Well, the answer is no, not necessarily. I mean, you could turn us off. But if you've got a strain of empathy in you, think of it this way. If you're fed up hearing about this, think about what it would be like to be somebody. And that somebody in this case would be any member of the LGBTQ plus community. And transgender folk are particularly the targets in this day and age, but really any member of the LGBTQ plus community who lives every single day knowing that there are people in this world who want to destroy them simply for being who they are, existing as they are. And if you say, well, that's an extreme exaggeration, you sound crazy to me. Check out what's going on in Uganda right now, where it's now a life sentence in prison if you are gay, and where it is now a death penalty sentence if you are HIV positive and you have sex with someone of the same gender. That's what's going on in Uganda. Don't get me started on what's going on in Southern American states like Tennessee, like Florida, like Texas, Arkansas, and elsewhere. Rights are being repealed as we speak. And these things don't typically happen in one fell swoop, where you go to bed one night and everybody's equal in this world, and you wake up the next morning and suddenly a significant community has been completely ostracized, marginalized, and can, by law, be punished and persecuted simply for being who they are as individuals. It doesn't happen like that. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And if you're choosing to ignore these very real truths going on in the world right now, and in places in this world geographically very close to us, then simply you're choosing to have your head in the sand. And that's why, Griff, it's important that we talk about this.
Definitely. And I spent the last 4 years with the Blue Jays in the front office in Major League Baseball, and bringing it back to baseball. It's a big promotion campaign and idea, and they do take it seriously, but not to the point, and they need to show that they take it seriously by reacting to the Anthony Bass situation and not just saying, oh, well, he came out and he made an apology and he's sorry and he has friends and he has relatives who are members of the community, and that's all it will take. I am glad that Pride Weekend is coming up this week, because they can't sweep it under the rug as quickly as they would like, and they're going to have to address the situation again and just show that it's not to sell tickets within the community, but that they actually mean what they say. And so far, they're not proving that with their actions.
You and I have talked. I mean, you and I text every day, and sometimes we're talking about the podcast and topics that we expect or may wish to bring up on the next show. And then other times we're just pals. And so, you know, Griff, you're a thoughtful guy. You care about people. You're not necessarily marching at the front of the Pride Parade, and I don't, and nobody else would expect you to be that person, unless, of course, you wanted to be. But I'm interested in your perspective as a longtime A, PR guy, and B, baseball columnist. You've done about 25 years in your life at both, for a combination of 50 years. Your cat is absolutely enthralled by the conversation. Anybody watching on YouTube can see it.
That is my daughter's cat. His name is Mr. Rasho, after Rasho Nesterovic, who happened to be her favorite player, her favorite Slovenian. So
Mr. Rasho is a great name. But I'm interested in your perspective on the apology itself. Anthony Bass's 35-second or so apology before the game. I believe it was last Tuesday.
Yeah, it was Tuesday, because it broke on Monday, and
they had the off day
earlier. Yeah. That's when we taped our show. I was there, and they brought him out. Who knows whether it was at his request or not. John Schneider said that he had come into the office to apologize, and Ross Atkins was in the office, and that Schneider suggested that he go apologize to his teammates, or address his teammates in any case, which he says that he did. And then he came out with a rehearsed apology, said not even all the right things. He said some things. And then he didn't take any questions. And to me, having been there in 2017 when Kevin Pillar made his misstep and called the pitcher for the Atlanta Braves by a slur, he was immediately suspended for 2 days, 2 games, and Ross Atkins flew to Atlanta to address the media and to address Kevin Pillar. And I don't see, I mean, I'm lost as to what the difference is in this situation in terms of the use of social media as opposed to the heat of the battle for Kevin Pillar and having a 2-game suspension. And it's something that I see as maybe we haven't seen the end of this. Maybe there will be a roster move by the time somebody might be listening to this podcast. There might be a roster move, but I just don't see how Anthony Bass can continue to be a member of the community inside the Blue Jays clubhouse after that incident without it being approval from the organization.
Yeah, and we'll get to it a little bit later on. I actually believe the team is clinging quietly to a baseball case for keeping Anthony Bass, at least for the time being, which is an indictment of sorts in terms of the lack of depth that they have at the higher ends of the minor leagues, pitching and bench wise. But we'll get to that.
It might be an indictment of the entire sport. I mean, for Major League Baseball not to react at all either is, because I've noticed in the last 5 to 10 years that Major League Baseball has become less of a leader and more of a follower. And they say, we'll back you up, whatever you do. And that's not the role of a leader. A solid leadership like Major League Baseball should be more than that. They should set the stage for it, and they should make the first move, and it's not happening. So I think what happens.
I think, Griff, some of these teams and some of these leagues, and the National Hockey League had a bad winter with some of this stuff. I think they're scared of the pushback from that extremely vocal fundamentalist minority that is extremely active on social media. And I do think that social media is a powerful tool in this day and age, but it is not necessarily reflective of the views of a general society. And the Bass example is a good one, where I have been aggressive with my opinion on the Bass stuff on Twitter. And I took 6 months off from Twitter, which is included in that 6 months was the time that the $250 billion owner of now Twitter and Tesla and others, the guy who loves to paint himself as the true victim in all of this, in this world, the guy who's really suffering through existence, took the platform over. And the first thing that I noticed, and I think others who had never really left the platform would have siphoned and worked through this at the time, but it's just filled with troll bots and nastiness. And I was getting a lot of that. I was getting a ton of that in my replies because I think most good people either reply in support, or most people just read what you say and move on. They take it in like they take in the opinion of anybody else on the matter, and they don't feel the need to comment. So oftentimes it feels like these troll bots, and interspersed with the troll bots are some fundamentalists who live online and speak the crazy talk. They tend to own your reply feed when you talk about something like this. But then later, I think it was Wednesday night, so the day after the apology, Anthony Bass got an inning. And I heard 40,000 plus Blue Jays fans taking in that Jays-Brewers game. Let Anthony Bass have it. And it reminded me that my Twitter replies are filled with phonies or with crazy fundamentalists who spend most of their time just rage farming. But the real world is still full of people who are generally allies, number one. And don't forget this, a lot of those people at that Blue Jays game that night, and it's representative of people who are at Blue Jays games every single day. If they are not LGBTQ plus themselves, they have a family member or a close friend, at least one, who is. And so it is personal for them, if not directly.
Yeah, I was at that game, and as soon as the bullpen door opened, because Bass had warmed up, and only the fans around the bullpen, which are now right in the stands, were able to communicate with him up close. But as soon as the bullpen gate opened and he made his way to the mound, I think it was in the 7th inning, the boos started, and his name hadn't even been announced yet. So there's an awareness. There was booing. It wasn't as loud as I had anticipated, but there was no cheering mixed in there, which is, to your point, that most people are good people and understand what's right and what's wrong. And the fact that there was no cheering made me feel better, and the fact that that people were so aware and so invested in this that they booed him before he was even announced, and then of course the volume went up when his name was announced, and the Blue Jays won the game. So not all was forgiven, but the cheering for winning took over at that point.
Right, and I mean, I think there's a sadness I feel, not necessarily for Anthony Bass, but I think we've all have people in our lives who've fallen victim to conspiracy theories and then end up propagating them. And the common thread that I've noticed in the people that I know who've fallen for this stuff is that they lack an individual identity. And so they end up sort of being drawn into those silos because they find like-minded people. And then it's typically online and not in person, but there they find community, and they find some kind of indirect identity. I mean, I still know people who wouldn't get the vaccine who still talk about it, even though the public health mandates have been null and void for a year now. I mean, it's just not in the lexicon and not mandated like it used to be, and yet some people who so badly seeking an identity thrust themselves into that are still latching on to it because it has become their identity. It's sad that way. I just want to read part of the apology here, Griff, and get your reaction to my theory on this. So I don't believe that Anthony Bass wrote this. I don't believe Anthony Bass believed anything that he said, but for the hypothetical sake of the point I'm going to make, let's take him at his word. Let's take him at his words, because he said them. I made a post that was hurtful to the Pride community, which includes friends of mine and close family members of mine, and I'm truly sorry for that. I just spoke with my teammates and shared with them my actions yesterday. I apologized with them, and as of right now, I'm using the Blue Jays resources to better educate myself to make better decisions moving forward. On he goes about the ballpark being for everybody, but the point I want to touch on has already been made in the part that I read. I made a post that was hurtful to the Pride community, which includes friends of mine and close family members of mine, and I'm truly sorry for that. So my question for Anthony Bass, if I was there, number one, and number two, if he took questions, would be, are you telling us that you have close family members and close friends who are in the LGBTQ plus community? Because you've just said that. And if so, that tells me that you at best mistreat them and at worst abuse them. Like, these, and I don't want to come down on whoever it was, whether it was the entire PR department or an individual in the PR department, presumably, who wrote this, because they were thrust into an impossible situation. And they were just trying to throw a little bit of cold water on something that had gotten completely out of control. But when you apologize like this, you think you might be helping the situation, or you're just spitting out words, when in fact what you're doing is leading to a deeper layer of questions about how it is you treat people you claim are very close to you in your life. That's the problem here. He's digging himself a deeper hole. He's not climbing out of it, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, my thought on that is that if he indeed had friends and relatives who were members of the LGBTQ plus community, that he would have gladly accepted questions. Like, the next step would be, how can I clarify? I know I made a statement, but there may be questions that weren't within that statement that you might want answered. Let me answer them now. But he turned and he went back in, whether that was at the behest of John Schneider or the front office, the PR department. And he didn't respond. He didn't follow up. And just something that, while you were speaking earlier, came to me is that when I started in the business, which is a long time ago, obviously before social media, It used to be, and even when I started at the Star in 1995, it used to be that what you wrote shaped fan opinion and public opinion because you were the expert. You wrote what you felt, what you knew, what your readers couldn't see or couldn't know. You wrote that, and you were an influencer of fan opinion. What I found as social media became more prevalent, as especially Twitter, is that people in my business would read Twitter before they wrote, and that would shape their opinion. So writers were having their opinion formed by fans, and as you said, some of them aren't legit, but that was opinion, the popular opinion out there, and now it's being written because most people, or a lot of people in the media business, want to be popular with the majority of readers and fans. And people think that Twitter represents the majority of people and fans. And you pointed out that it's not necessarily so.
Yeah, and I have to say, I know Rob Longley wrote a piece in the Toronto Sun. He was able to track down the general manager, Ross Atkins. So first of all, to Rob Longley, I don't know, maybe you want to share your microscope or your binoculars, whatever it was that you used to find the disappearing man, to land a conversation with him. Good on you. But I just thought that was absolutely pathetic that Ross Atkins said the apology was authentic. Ross, that's bullshit. You know it. And it's quite cowardly for you to suggest otherwise. You're not controlling this narrative and you're not controlling this conversation. Do better. Where's Mark Shapiro? And I am not a conspiracy theorist. And yet here I'm going to take this to this place. We know that the chair of the Toronto Blue Jays, Ed Rodgers, is somebody who posted on social media with pride the fact that he is friends, or at least has enough money to fly him and his family to Palm Beach to dine at Mar-a-Lago and take a picture with the 45th president of the United States. And we know that supporters of Donald Trump, and we know that Donald Trump himself, share particular views about the world. And so as a gay man, I sit back and I observe. And I know that there are layers to where I'm going here, that there is a hierarchy, and sometimes people on the third or fourth rung of the ladder never deal with the guy at the top of the ladder. I understand that when I'm saying this. But when you have the chair openly bragging in social media photos about certain friendships that he has, and then stuff like this occurs, and you stand back as an organization and you don't really do anything about it, at least not to this point. And we're recording on Monday, June the 5th. I mean, something could be done in 3 days, and this dates itself. But to this point, nothing has been adequately done about the Anthony Bass situation. And I ask myself, it's quite possible that this franchise simply does not care. And I'm not sitting here with any kind of power to change that, but it's just something I keep in the back of my mind. And, you know, much like Anthony Bass doesn't necessarily want to give his dollars to places like Target and Bud Light, maybe I won't be going to a game that I otherwise would have gone to, just personally speaking, you know, and I can make that decision for me. But I have more questions about this organization now than I did 8 days ago.
And hopefully the Blue Jays do care, and hopefully there is something going on behind the scenes that will make this situation better, and maybe make Anthony Bass disappear from the organization, because it's not a good look. It's not good inside the clubhouse. There's a lot of young players that take their lead from veteran players. I remember when Shoemaker was here, he was the player rep, and COVID hit, and he was a non-believer in that it was an actual pandemic. And he was a gamer. He was a good pitcher gamer, had bounced back from a lot of physical adversity. And there was no chance, zero chance when he became a free agent that the Blue Jays would ever re-sign him because of the influence that he brought to that clubhouse. And that was behind the scenes. So hopefully something is going on behind the scenes. I mean, it may be as simple as having to negotiate with the Major League Baseball Players Association because of rights within the basic agreement. Maybe there's something there. But as you said, Scotty, hopefully by next Monday when we record again, there will be progress on this issue to the betterment of the team.
Like guys just get DFA'd all the time, and I know Bass has been performing better over his last 10 appearances or so, but guys get DFA'd all the time, and I don't know. I guess he'd file a grievance, or the Players Association would be able to claim, based on better recent performance on the mound, that there were ulterior reasons for Bass being removed from the clubhouse. But
well, I mean, the bottom line here is that what fans need to understand is that if Anthony Bass was DFA'd, his $3 million contract is guaranteed. He gets paid that, whether it's paid for by the Blue Jays or a team that picks him up. He was going to be a free agent at the end of the season. So whatever team signs him next season, he has not been adversely affected by the behavior of the Toronto Blue Jays if they let him go, if they DFA him on June the 10th or 12th, whatever it is. So really, those who say, well, he's got a right to free speech and blah, 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 and the Jays also have the right not to keep someone employed. His contract is guaranteed. He's not losing money. His family will be fine. It's just that's not the type of relationship and personality, to me, that they need to or want to have in their clubhouse.
Right. And even people who rant and rave about the right to free speech understand that there are limits to free speech, because they don't walk around, well, some do, but most don't walk around using the N-word or using the 3 or 6 letter F word to describe anybody in the LGBTQ plus community, but I'm thinking gay men here. And the reason they don't do that is because they know they can't. And so they have replaced those epithets with words like woke, because nobody can accuse, if somebody calls me, quote, woke, I can't go back and accuse them of being racist or homophobic or this or that or the other thing, because woke covers a bunch of things, right? And so there's plausible deniability in there. And so it's this constant cat and mouse game of trying to get hatred out of our society, but people committed to bigotry, committed to hate, continue to find ways to stay slightly ahead on the chase. And that's where we are right now. We said earlier, Griff, we talk a little bit about the baseball element of this. And there could be MLB machinations going on behind the scenes right now that we're not necessarily privy to, and the Jays may end up walking away from Anthony Bass at some point here soon. But I think one of the reasons Anthony Bass is still here today is the fact that the Blue Jays really don't have any pitching depth in the higher minor leagues, somebody who can come up and take those innings. I mean, the one significant bullet that they had to fire in the minor leagues early in the season has been fired. Nate Pearson is here. And to my view, even though he gave up a couple of solo home runs in Sunday afternoon's win over the Mets at Citi Field, to my view, Nate Pearson isn't going anywhere. I think he's acquitted himself well enough to this point that you want to continue to use him maybe in bulk as a 2-inning guy here and there, and continue to test him, which has begun, by the way, but continue to test him in certain leverage situations and see how he can do. There's really nobody else now.
I might disagree with that slightly in that, if Anthony Bass is a middle reliever now, has pitched his way to a non-leverage roles, you still have Zach Pop, who's almost ready to come back from the IL. Jay Jackson was brought up. They're both roster players. They're both 40-man roster players, and you will have an extra roster spot if you ever DFA'd Bass. And like, so that role of a middle inning guy who's expected to throw one inning could very easily be a Zach Pop role or a Jay Jackson role. And with Chris Bassett on paternity leave, coming back for his next start on Wednesday, that may be an opportunity to sort of, Jackson was brought up to replace Bassett while the team was in New York as an extra arm. That might be an opportunity to use that roster spot and sort of make a three-way move, ending up with Bass leaving the team at that point. I mean, that there's possibilities like that we don't know behind the scenes, as you pointed out. But, you know, there are ways of doing it, and it's not like every other team in baseball is deep 1 to 13 on their pitching staff. And the Jays are no different than that. And they do have a couple of guys that could fill that spot.
Yeah. Just to tie a knot on this thing, like my view on it, it's not a left wing, right wing thing. It's a right, wrong thing. And serious forms of antisocial behavior have to have pro-social consequences, or it'll continue to be death by 1,000 paper cuts and society will continue to devolve. And we as a harmonized society are devolving, and we're watching laws change. We're hearing politicians. I mean, there was an Alberta provincial election campaign that included some transphobic language from some candidates. This lives in the ecosystem now. And, you know, empathy is the ability to walk in someone else's shoes. So just stop if you can't relate to this and think to yourself for a second, what if something core to my being, whatever that is, you know yourself better than we ever will, but you as an individual, it could be totally innocuous. Just pick an example. Like I like dandelions. Well, what if there was a movement to curtail the rights of people who like dandelions? You know, it's a stupid example, but I'm trying to make the point. If there was something core to your fundamental existence that was constantly being debated in politics, in the public sphere, on social media, and if it reaches a point like it has in some of the southern United States, like it has in Uganda, in the worst example in recent memory that went down last week, if it reaches legislation, if the laws start to change, imagine what life would be like for you, and imagine the fear that you would have. And so when people raise their hand and say, hey, this stuff isn't okay, maybe they've got a point. Maybe they're just not looking to complain and agitate you as you go about your day. Maybe there's something bigger here. And that's the only thing I want to say to tie a bow on it. This is really disconcerting stuff, and it's more broader socially. Anthony Bass is just a very small fish, relatively speaking, in a large pond of problems right now, but it all adds up and it leads to worrying places.
Well said, Scotty. And to me, the bottom line, and this is just the bottom line of what's gone on in North America and in America especially, was when Barack Obama got elected. And to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's as little as or as much as I know about science. And the equal and opposite reaction was Donald Trump's presidency. And hopefully that's behind America at this point. And with Biden bringing more tolerance and ageism and wisdom, maybe the equal and opposite reaction to that will create a better society in the U.S. and in Canada. So we'll see.
We can only hope for that because we need to reverse course in some of the areas that we're delving into. And I mean, let's be honest, there's a reality and there is unreality. And people always say you got to meet in the middle on things. You know, this isn't tax me a little bit more because I'm left wing, or tax me a little bit less because I'm right wing, or enhance my social services because I'm left wing, or take some social services away because I want to be taxed less because I'm right wing. It's not left wing, right wing stuff like that. This is about reality. This is about misinformation, and reality and truth must win, or we're in a whole world of trouble, and it'll get even more ugly.
I think the bottom line again is, you said earlier, this isn't about right or left, it's right or wrong. And we could leave it at that. I mean, and we'll pick this up again if the story continues, which hopefully there will be some sort of a resolved issue by the time that we get together again next Monday.
So last week we talked about the first third of the season, and man, the first third of the season was littered with American League East teams. And the Jays have done tremendously this year outside of the AL East, horrifically inside of the AL East. But you were big on the second third of the season. So when we talked last week, they had played 54 games. I'm not good at math. I acknowledge that all the time, but I do believe 54 times 3 is 162. So play it out in 1/3 chunks. The Jays have now played 59 games. They are 4-1 in the first 5 games of the second third of the season. The Milwaukee Brewers and the New York Mets, a couple of National League opponents, have filled the schedule so far. The Houston Astros will be in Toronto this week. That'll be a really good test, Griff. But so far, so good on your working theory that the second third of the season is where the Blue Jays are going to build themselves into a back third of the season team that is better able to deal with some of the intra-division adversity.
Oh, definitely. I think that one of the things that one of the factors to that was the record in interleague play that the Blue Jays have posted, not just this year, but in previous years. And of the 54 games in the second third, there'll be 21 of them against National League opponents and only 9 within the AL East. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that they learned about themselves, that they learned about their pitching, that they learned about the sequencing of their relievers, that they learned about their starting pitchers who can go over 100 pitches. And we pointed it out before, is that there's no team in baseball that signed 5 starting pitchers, or that has 5 starting pitchers who are durable and reliable in terms of never missing a start. And, you know, when you see Berrios and even Kikuchi, I know that you're not a big fan of Kikuchi's home runs that he gives up, which is among
Keep him solo. Keep him solo.
Keep him solo, yeah. But the bottom line is that when you're throwing these guys out every 5 days and you know the sequence, now you're leaving your bullpen with 3 innings to cover every game, say as an average, 2 or 3 innings. And you can set up your bullpen and use them with the knowledge that you gained in the first 54 games, which wasn't such a great third of the season, a great slice of the season. But now you've got some even of the secondary hitters starting to come out of it a little bit. I think Alejandro Kirk, just watching game after game, he seems to be swinging the bat a little better. Still questions about his catching behind the plate, and, you know, maybe giving things away to the opponent.
Vladdy's looking. Vladdy had a good weekend. Springer, yeah,
yes. Even when Vladdy on the last homestand was 0 for 6, he was hitting the ball hard. He was on top of pitches, and I asked John Schneider about it, and he said, "Yeah, I can see it coming out." I mean, he made great contact. He had a bunch over 100 miles an hour, exit velocity, exit philosophy. And so there's a lot of stuff coming around at just the right time to make that prediction of the second 54 games being far better than the first 54, to make that a reality.
And we got to dive into the Wayback Machine. People say, Griff, that one of their favorite components of this podcast, and we're still in our very early days, are some of your old stories. So as we sit here on June the 5th, 2023, we're marking the 34th anniversary, June the 5th, 1989, of the opening of Skydome. Now, you and I talked about that a lot last week, so we won't repeat ourselves here, but 34 years ago tonight, as an almost 10-year-old, I was sitting behind home plate a few rows back in the 500 level, looking down on Jimmy Key pitching to Paul Molitor. Molitor had the first ever hit at the Skydome. Fred McGriff, who was my favorite Blue Jay at the time and Hall of Famer now, hit the first home run in the history of Skydome. And that was in the bottom of the second inning of that game. The Brewers did go on to win, but we know the Jays have had a lot of success, particularly in the early days in that ballpark. So it's the 34th anniversary of Skydome. And it's also, we're in the area of the 34th, or is it 32nd? Because it was 1991, right? 32nd anniversary of the firing of legendary Montreal Expos manager Buck Rodgers, who obviously you worked with, you knew well. And there's a pretty good backstory to how that all went down and how it all went public.
Yeah, it was, there was an off day before a trip to Houston, and I got the call at home because it was an afternoon charter flight to Houston for the team. I got the call from Dave Dombrowski that Buck Rodgers was being let go. He was being fired to address his friends in the media, and nothing. It was crickets. There was nothing going on. So this was around 9:30. I called Buck at his apartment. I said, Buck, would you like to do a presser with your media friends? And he was all over it. Yeah, I'd do it. But I hadn't asked Dave Dombrowski yet, which probably I should have in hindsight. But so I called Grumpy's, which is a great little bar down on Bishop Street. There's a lot of great little bars that I had known.
Is Grumpy's still there?
I think it's there in another.
Okay.
Yeah,
because it's a great name.
Yeah. So I called and I told him to shut down the bar for lunch because we were going to have Buck Rodgers going away press conference. And I called a bunch of the media people that he was friends with, told him to be at Grumpy's at noon. The flight was at 3:30 or something, so we had time, and Buck wasn't going on the flight anyway. And so I got down to Bishop. All of a sudden, there's like satellite trucks on the street, and I'm going, whoa, this is a little bigger than I thought. I thought we just invited like 10, 12 people. Satellite trucks, TV cameras. And so we go in, and Buck does his thing. He's very grateful. I left my Amex card at the bar, and I went to the airport, and I told Larry Bernard to bring the card with him when he came. And so we're on the flight, and Buck was to this day, very appreciative of the thought of allowing him to do that. So we're on the flight, and Dave Dombrowski comes back to my seat and says, do you think we should have allowed Buck to talk to the media? And I'm thinking to myself, should I tell him? And he goes, and I go, yeah, I think I did call Buck, and we did have something at Grumpy's, and the look was sort of, I don't know what the look was on Dombrowski's face, but we got to the hotel in Houston, and I got in the room waiting for my bags, turn on the TV, and there I am on Bishop Street directing traffic on ESPN, and I'm going, damn, I'm glad I told him because he's watching the same thing in his room.
There you are with like the construction, the orange construction vest and the flares and just
directing things. And if I had said, no, you did the right thing, then I might have left that organization at the same time as Dombrowski did in 91.
Yeah.
But it was cool. And that's the sort of personal touch and the personal relationships that you have with managers working in PR, and the fact that we thought of that and allowed him to do that, and also allowed his media friends to say goodbye and to write something positive about him. I tell that story, and every time I see or talk to Buck, we talk about that. So it's all good.
Well, he appreciates it, and whether Dave Dombrowski liked it at the time, Griff, it put the organization in a better light, right? I mean, you got to give a beloved figure the opportunity to say goodbye
on the way out the door. It's just, aside from anything else, it's just good business.
Yeah. And I mean, everything was done in terms of a positive look to the organization. Nobody, you don't tell the people in Grumpy's, hey, this is my idea. The organization didn't want to do it. I'm sure in hindsight, and if they're watching Exit Philosophy, they'll find out, but that's the way it went down. And the best was when Larry Bernarth came. He was the last one to get on the flight. The late Larry Bernarth, who was wonderful, wonderful. He was my seatmate on all the charters. And he handed me my card, my Amex card. And he turned to Dombrowski, who was standing there waiting. And he goes, Dave, you're an asshole. And he got on the flight and off we went. Every time there's an anniversary or a date with either the Blue Jays or the Expos, it's amazing how many times that brings up a story that makes me smile, and that's one of them.
Well, you've been around it, man. Dombrowski just would have been a kid back then, right? I mean, because like he's running the Phillies now. He built the Marlins team that won the World Series. He had all those great years in Detroit. He won a World Series with the Red Sox. Like he's had a great career.
Yeah,
in baseball, I would have been a young man at the time.
In the late 80s, early 90s, when he was GM and was just moving to Montreal, he would come and play pickup basketball with us every Thursday night. It was a group of school teachers and lawyers and journalists and me. And we invited Dave, and Dave would come out and he'd play, and he had a little 3-point shot, not exactly a jump shot, more of a set shot. But, he was a gamer and he loved coming out. And then we would go to a local place in Point St. Charles, Mannion's Tavern, and we would sit there for 3 hours, and not one person would recognize the general manager of the Montreal Expos. It was that part of town. Plus, if he was GM of the Canadien, I'm sure everybody would have been all over.
Yeah.
But he liked that. He liked the fact that he could go have a beer, have a steak sandwich, and nobody would recognize him. But those were good days.
Yeah. Did you fully cop? Like on the plane, did you fully cop, or did you have to sort of have a bigger conversation with him about the whole Grumpy's thing further down the road when it didn't matter anymore?
I never talked to him about it again.
Amazing.
Yeah.
At some point, it just doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. He would have been good with it because it turned out in a positive light for him and for the organization and for Buck and for us. So it was good.
Let's put a wrap on today's show with I'm going to put you on the spot, but quick ranking because you dealt with some good ones. If you were to give me the top 3 in your opinion Expos managers in club history, and I was born in '79, so I really don't have memories before 1985, and even those memories you'll understand aren't very good because I was only 5-6 years old. But to me, Felipe and Buck Rodgers have to be in the top 3. Right?
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of discussed this in the past, but there's so many different varieties of categories for ranking guys. But Felipe is one of the 5 men I admire most in my entire life. So he's got to be on that list. And then Buck Rodgers is on the list because he was, we would go into bars and it would be like a duel on the streets in a Western. We'd be looking at each other, eyeballing each other, and then would head for the receipt that was lying on the bar to see who could pick it up for the writers, for the media, and see whose expense account could carry the most weight by the end of the year. And he was a great traveling companion, and also one that would share information with you to make your job easier too. And a great guy who played poker at night with the coaches, and talked a lot of baseball, talked a lot about life. So those are 2. And then Gene Mauch was the first one that I ever worked with. And he was just so intimidating because he was like the little general and I was 19 years old. So, that he makes a lasting impression. But they all have different assets that make me remember them, but those are three that I'm pretty fond of.
What did you say about Gene Mach in an earlier episode? He could make a bad player mediocre, and he could make a good player mediocre.
Yeah, that's about it.
The small ball.
I mean, every great team that he worked with, or he managed to have them finish runner up. Yeah.
81 and 81 never hurt anybody. Just be in the race until September and then fall off a cliff. It's okay.
Analytics would not have been his friend. He loves small balls. Yeah. So good.
Well, we'll leave it there. And Griff, thanks for your thoughts on what I think is the most important episode that we've done. We're obviously going to track the Blue Jays' work on this Anthony Bass file. We know that it's Pride weekend coming up. Friday and Saturday are the major events down at Rodgers Center. They've got those signs in the outfield social areas saying, "Come as you are." Let's hope that this franchise means that. And let's hope that there is legitimate accountability for Anthony Bass, the individual who perpetrated all of this. He caused all of this. We wouldn't be talking about this without the decision that he made to post that anti-LGBTQ plus propaganda. But an important conversation, and sadly one that we're probably going to have again for entirely different sets of reasons sometime down the road.
Absolutely, Scotty. And we're in this, and we're discussing this not to make anyone look bad, but to make sure that they get it right. And so far it hasn't happened, but there's still time, and there's still hope that this thing can be worked out, and that the organization can move forward, separating right from wrong.
You got it. Antisocial behavior has to have pro-social consequences, or society suffers as a result. We'll put a wrap on episode 5, easy for me to say, of Exit Philosophy, and we'll get you again next Monday. Thanks for listening.